Welcome, everybody. It's Alan Andres here with another edition of It's ZuTime. Today is the 2nd of August, 2022. And let me say it's fantastic to be back and chatting to everybody again. I am the founder of Zucoins and Zucas. So what a lot to talk about. What a lot to get through today, everybody. Pretty excited about it. Let's start off and get the early bits out of the way with the progress and where we're up to. You would have seen that not much has changed on the roadmaps that are on the site. So have a look at those. I've certainly got some news about the rollout of the coins, everybody. Been fantastic. We've got nearly the better part of 40.079 million coins made their way into the hands of our wonderful Zucoin holders, which has been fantastic from the support teams up to batch 7 now. Now, some of the times you would have seen, just make sure you make inquiries with particularly the support at zucoins.com, because you are getting phone calls directly from our designated participants, that is the support team, because it is a one-on-one person notification of moving those coins into your wallets. So there is a procedure. We're getting another email out to those that now are more comfortable with the backups and the restore functions, feeling good about the tutorials we've done. We've had no failure rates in the way in which the coins have moved in. So that's been fantastic. And it just means that you get that email, follow those instructions. I've got a copy here which is going out that if you haven't got your coins, so those that have already got them, you can disregard this email. Clearly says that on it. There's a few steps there to make sure you follow up with. So just as a recap, so you can look back on this particular update of It's ZuTime. Just review the tutorials. There's a link there which gives you absolute certainty when you see those tutorials on the backup and restore functions. You're the one's got to be comfortable with it. Also the send and receive, of course, with the wallet. There's a link to download the wallet if you haven't already got one. So just by all means, grab that and get stuck into it, that you've got the wallet ready to take the receipt. You're going to register that wallet address. We keep that on file. And there's good reason for that, because as we're getting coins out the door, we're also making sure that our designated issuers from the company, the entity here, certainly would be taking an audit trail of that. We don't want any disputes later on that people say they didn't or didn't get the coins because they've lost them themselves. And significantly, you're in a better position that we both know exactly where we stand with those audit trails on the release of the coins. And there'll be a list of names there with numbers that you can pick and choose some of the designated staff that you wish to deal directly with, because they will contact you and they will make sure that that two-factor authentication is locked and loaded so that you get the coins across. So that's the first thing. Look at the roadmap there. We are extremely busy and following the processes now in terms of the ZuBot that we've talked about. Having seen the coins, and the reaction has been phenomenal in the way in which that's operated and worked as to the specifications we're excited about. So we know everybody's aware that on the 17th of September 2022, we're all gearing up for the big Australian crypto convention on the Gold Coast. You can contact the staff here, the marketing team, Liam Scammell, in relation to that, and get a bit of a handle on what's happening, the crowd and the crew we've got going. So what we're building and doing out is to get as close to that date that we can complete the ZuBot. There's a lot of work for Robert to do on that front. The propagation of the nodes, of course, for the release, and that will give us the opportunities then with what I've talked about in the past about the million wallet drop with some obviously the free coin and fractions thereafter. We have a massive database to get through, and of course that particular connector or bridge allows one or two of the exchanges in relation to get those up and running for you. So we're in the hands of that process. Just keep an eye on the roadmap as we get close to that date. Ideally, that's the date that we'd like all this in play, and that you can see those exchanges there. Now, just on the exchanges, we've narrowed it down a little bit. We do have the 6 exchanges that we've talked about. Those contracts are in place. Payments been made. And what we have made inquiry is the two types of the bridges to expedite that. One is what's called an ERC bridge, which is really in the hands of the exchange. And the other is the split chain native protocol bridge or connector. So they're the one, it's the split chain one we're focusing on. And there are a couple of the exchanges that want the ERC rather than the protocol of the split chain. So we're only focusing on those at this point, so we can get a couple of exchanges up, at least one. So other than that, the other milestones have been achieved, and it's really just heads down and working hard by the support team that the coins are being pushed out. It's our preferred case that we don't want to be sitting on them because they're too valuable. There's a lot of value involved, and of course, it's better in your hands that you take responsibility, as we know how the decentralized network program works and what's happening. So I don't have a lot more on that because that's the busy time schedules. Marketing's all set to play. We've got some great participants now that are working behind the scenes with us on that, and we're just leading up to that big convention date, 17th of September 2022. Now, I got a little email out last night, or yesterday rather, and that's about, we've had a lot of questions in relation to that one, which is the ASIC investigation. So don't be shy of that. ASIC, they are humans, and they're doing their job. And we hope they do a great job, by the way, as well. So that's important. But it is an investigation inquiry into Zucoins and Zucas. We're not the lone tonto here. This crypto space has got inherent problems and issues in terms of hacking and frauds and things. And we should say that we welcome that with open arms. In one sense, it's a great thing because it's very hard to get a cost-free audit done of your programs and your technology and the way in which that works, to be honest. So it was going to happen at some stage, and it's fantastic that everybody's on the radar, and that's just something that comes up. Now, a couple of things about that notice which we wanted to highlight, and it's important you understand, subject to the jurisdictional powers, if you like, that ASIC have, and we're talking about issues in the crypto space. Now, ASIC have made it clear on a number of occasions, and there's a guidance called 225 that was issued, which talks about specifically, let's say, the crypto assets and Bitcoin, that if you tick a few boxes in the way in which the technology is built and done, then those boxes mean that you are not a financial product. And that's a significant term, if you can recall that, whether or not the particular crypto asset is a financial product. Because if it isn't, you don't have any issues in relation to the jurisdiction issues that ASIC are looking at in terms of financial products per se and the regulations that are inherent therein. If it is, of course, then that can lead to what's then called carrying on the business of a financial services business. And that's the area that we don't want to be involved in or caught up in. But nevertheless, you've got to go through the review that's taking place and the suspicions that are inherent as a result as to whether or not it is a financial product. And I thought today that I'd sort of lead into, I have the heading today being ASIC, the banks, and Zucoins, because they're all interrelated as to what we're looking at. Now, from a perspective of the entity, and obviously as the founder, what we say, which we justify clearly in our position from previous legal advices, the way in which we have justified our position in relation to the technology, the finances of the entities involved, and also the way in which we have we looked at the staff and the development and the IT in particular, is that we say clearly, or unequivocally, that we are not a financial product in terms of Zucoins or the PWA wallet. Now, that's always open to debate because it all hinges on the factual circumstances in relation to that crypto. And if you go back to that information guideline 225, which has been revised a few times, clearly the position of Bitcoin has been determined not to be a financial product. Now, that's because you've got this decentralization mechanisms, which we've talked about for a long, long time on the other ZuTime channels. And that clearly is where you've got peer-to-peer transfer of value. Now, if you take the blockchain and you look at the miners, I've talked about that, and you think about the structure, the whole structure of what is Bitcoin, we have modeled ourselves on comparing only with Bitcoin. We've said that we are next generation crypto, and for good reason, because our technology avoids the issues that are inherent within the blockchain world and also improves upon the way in which those processes operate and work. Now, I think people need to understand clearly as to, what that means if it's not a financial product in the sense of Bitcoin and why we parallel ourselves with that. Firstly, you think of blockchain. Blockchain is where the miners that we hear about have massive computer powers because they are holding all of the data. The entire history of the chain that I've mentioned since 2009, that immortal day when the first two nodes were switched on, is there and ready for everybody to see of every single transaction in the blockchain. And what happens is on the flip side, the peers, that is those that are conducting the transaction of value between each other, have very minimal data. So on a scale of things, you've got massive amount of data with the nodes that are validating, and they're there importantly because they're using proof of work, which is a suggestion that says, let's confirm that the peer, little fellas here, are actually legit in the coins that they hold or balance, and also the transactions are validated going through. Now, that's the current thinking in the world, that you must carry that volume of data in terms of the blockchain. And the blockchain scenario is the same with Ethereum and other products. It's all driven by that. What we've achieved, which what you've seen now with the coins out and about and the transactions that you're doing, is the complete flip side. The peers over in our world of the split chain have all the data relating to their transactions themselves. So when you look at your phone next time, you'll see all your history of your data and transactions. The peers are doing the grunt work. On the other side, the nodes, that is the validators that are there to confirm that what we say is correct with the peers, have very minimal data. And that's the ingenious part of the system, because it means that the nodes are carrying basically only the last two transactions cased in the network, which means there's no inefficiencies in terms of the ability to scale up the speed and what I talk about, the blockchain trilemma, solving that problem. And also security, which is your time lock systems. So both ASIC and us are on the same page. I'm interested in consumer, obviously the integrity of the product, the reputation of the product, and what we're doing to achieve to protect the interests of those that are buyers and holders of coins. More so than whatever is out there in the current space, I can assure you, to avoid the hacking issues, to make sure that transactions between two peers have been completed, and that there's less pressure on the network. Now, if you think about this, what we do, I talked about the Bitcoin or the Ethereum blockchain, the volume of data that needs to make that work with decentralized crypto or the ASIC. If you think about our case, you can have two peers dealing with each other, A and B. This is in the Zucoin world on the split chain protocol. Now, at any point in time, every transaction that goes on between those two peers, there is only ever 4 sets of transaction data in the nodes. So think about it. That's the last 4 transactions from both two peers. So two peers leaves 4 sets of transaction history on the nodes. Now, if those two peers do 1 million transactions between each other, so that's 1 million transactions, they reside with the peer. They don't sit with the node because it's only the last 2 transactions at any point in time, which is this flow rate we talk about, a 1-to-1 ratio. That is, it never exponential growth with it between what the data is required by those two peers. The bulk of the heavy lifting is done by the peers themselves of what they store. That's the complete opposite in Bitcoin. That's why there's pressure on the blockchain networks currently. Now, that's not something that I'm just waffling on about. That's the uniqueness and the integrity in terms of this next generation, what we see as the wonderful build that Robert's done with the Zucoins and the split chain protocol. Now, recently, it's brought to my attention that Vitalik, who is the guru that created Ethereum, Burton, or Butin, whichever way you want to pronounce it, and he's come out of the blocks. They're looking at this merge that's coming up not far away because there is pressure in the Ethereum and the slowdown and the concerns. Now, those concerns, what I've just described about blockchain generally, can be summarized as follows. Now, he said that the purpose over the next few years, so this is the next few years from where Ethereum is, in the shift from proof of work into proof of stake, that's to try and speed up and minimize the impact of what's happening in the Ethereum network, because you've got NFTs and all sorts of things added on and smart contracts, is that he's trying to, quote, reduce the amount of data that validator nodes are required to store. He says that the purge will reduce the hard drive space needed for such validators. He's discussed the long-term future of Ethereum, and he says that it desperately needs to increase its capacity by decreasing the complexities. Now, he's promoted the need to reduce the amount of data validators nodes are required to store. Quote, the current state of blockchain technology is that all nodes are required to retain the history of the entire blockchain, creating an ever-increasing need for more storage. That also has an impact on the environment as well, by the way. We're all well aware as to the computer power, the energy that's used in terms of these systems to even search and find quickly data within that massive growth of blockchain. So that's a side issue, but that's a crucial issue and a distinction with what we've done with split chain. Nevertheless, he said that it's a problem and it needs to be solved. Now, you can't just transition overnight massive databases, push them into or fork that out and create something that's going to reduce the impact of that if the whole network system is reliant upon searching and seeking all of the data that's in the block to basically mean that validating you as a real person holding coins, if you like, through the wallet, and alternatively making sure you can't double spend. That's the whole purpose of the validator. Now, he said we're looking for a simpler version of Ethereum, that it should be possible for someone to understand the entire protocol given enough time, effort, and ability is put into that. Well, let me just say these immortal words. Well, hello. Welcome to split chain. Now, that's the essence of where we sit with what we have put on the table in terms of circling back to ASIC's concerns as to whether or not, A, if it's determined that it has to be determined one way or the other, whether we're a financial product or not, we say we're clearly not, the legal advices are there, and whether that spills into, are we conducting financial services businesses? I don't have an issue with that. Not at all. You know, knock yourself out. Go and have a look, because the work program is the system speaks for itself. That if Bitcoin, through the coin itself and the way people move value peer-to-peer, and we're superior to that technology because what I've just described and what's already on the table, we're not a product. We're not a financial product under the definitions of which are caught in terms of the Corporations Act. Now, sure, we've had delays. I've admitted and apologised for some of that over the time, but every single delay has been worthwhile in strengthening and building and making sure there's consumer protection and mechanisms in place, because this is a dangerous industry. Once you get into the decentralized space, it's all in your hands. If you don't back up, you lose the coins, you lose your phone. We've talked about that. I mean, we had people talking the last time about, I've indicated there was instant send and receive transactions. Well, it was. Each time there's been an evolution growth in the split chain and also the Zucoins. What the wallet you see, I think we're up to version 151, even as I speak. Now, that's all been in your interest and my interest, of course, as holders of Zucoins. So, yes, it's taken a long journey, but we're at the pointy end now, and I'm delighted to say that's exactly why I welcome this ASIC inquiry. Now, the difficulty is that you hear all these things about frauds and scams and banks and contacts and things, and one of the lessons we're taught is people purport to be government officials. I mean, I've had phone calls from purported people from the Australian Tax Office, and they're all frauds. So when you get a call out of the blue from someone purporting to be from ASIC, your first reaction is it's got to be a scam, and that's why the calls were coming through. Now, from our perspective, when we get issued with this Section 19 notices, there's a lot of restrictions and things we can and can't say and do. Now, I haven't had the formalities of the meeting yet, but that's coming. Robert certainly has, and he's not able to share anything. In fact, you know, in a true sense, compiling the information that ASIC wants to see and to believe and know that what I've just described as the system, we've lost a week. We've lost a week. We're not a major banking corporation that can afford thousands of people to accommodate the whims and mercies of ASIC, which also has thousands of public servants on a 9-to-5 payroll. We can only have one guy that can compile all that and go through the technology that what I've just described and what you're now seeing. So what's it all about in terms of that? If you look at that, now we have to comply with those notices to a certain extent. There's some jurisdictional issues that'll arise. There's some constitutional issues that'll arise as well. But nevertheless, we stand by the product. We stand by what has been created, which is the Zucoins and, of course, the wallet that you're seeing and where we're going. It's for us, it's moving forward. We are just facilitators as we try and put together things to make it easier for the world to adopt Zucoins and, of course, build and embrace what things like Ethereum can't do, which I've just described from Vitalik. So that's the position that we couldn't say much until the calls started coming through. Is it or is it not a scam from ASIC? Now, the reaction was I did ring ASIC up. I rang Warren Jones. I don't have any problems with that. Another gentleman there, and alluded to them that the consumers are taught not to respond to these things. And then all of a sudden, because we have to provide the material as to your details, which we hopefully respect that ASIC will keep them private, and the phone numbers and the coins, etc. They wanted to see that. Unfortunately, out of the blue, they make calls and they wonder why you're thinking that ASIC people are a scam. That's why the email went out. So just circling back into that. And that's why I've put the extra details there, that if you're uncertain, then by all means, make the point and talk to ASIC. They're not the boogeymen. They're doing their job. And if you think about it, where in the world can you be in such a wonderful place that at the government expense, ultimately taxpayers, you get a free audit? So we stand by the product. Now, what's it about in terms of digging deep? I mentioned earlier the couple of provisions about this financial product. Now, I have disclosed this before. We've talked about the advices we've got. If you have a crypto asset, now for tax purposes, that's a separate thing because you're talking about the tax, where the tax office says, yes, it's a commodity. And as a result, it's CGT. And we all understand the rules with the tax office. You buy, you have a date, you either wait the 12 months, you get CGT benefit, and you sell. I've told people that in terms of pay the damn tax and be done with it. It's nothing more enjoyable than watching these public servants, government officials, and politicians losing your money. There's no accountability. There's incompetence. They don't care. They write out checks. They send out $500 billion on submarines that don't work. The list goes on and on. So that's the enjoyable part. Nevertheless, responsibility to pay the tax. So if you look at the tax issue and you look at the definitions that are coming into play between the government departments, it's a commodity. Now, commodity means something like bullion, or it could be, for example, a nice bottle of Penfolds Hermitage Grange. Talk about that in a minute. Whatever it is, that's the asset that's been acquired. Now, if that asset stays within that definition, and you look at the definitions under the Corporations Act for what is a financial product, there's a whole raft of things. It's pretty complicated law. It's not easy, but you can tick boxes straight away. You can say your Zucoins, they're not a share. It's nothing to do with any entity or business that we have here. When you hold a Zucoin, you have got no rights. There's nothing entitlement. There's no dividends. There's no voting rights. There's no distribution. There's no nothing. That's been perfectly expressly talked about in the purchase agreements. You buy a Zucoin. There's nothing added to that value proposition at all. It's not a derivative. You're not trading some highfalutin CFD or derivative back to back with call or put options and things that relate to the Zucoin. So that's two examples under the definitions of financial product. Now, the real murky ones is, does the definition of some crypto fall into things like a non-cash payment facility? Now, let's talk about that briefly. What that essentially is saying is that if you keep the wallet that you have and you're transacting peer-to-peer, which is what you're doing of the transaction of that digital asset, it doesn't get caught as a non-cash payment facility. It's when you start attaching things to that is to the wallet, that says that a third party is going to provide services that would convert that into fiat, which then conducts business with merchants, etc., that you then start to get into this space that says, well, you may be providing a non-cash payment facility. For example, a debit card or some of the exemptions that are available in relation to reward schemes and programs of what you do. Now, if people tune into what I'm saying, everything we've worked for is about open source code software on all fronts. The wallet, the coin, even the ZooBots that we talk about. They are little engines that are created freely for the world to enjoy, because that creates mass adoption on a number of fronts. And the same thing is with the merchants. We've never said that the merchants are going to be something that we conduct instructions from you guys in order to get goods and services to be bought. We provide the free code that the merchant can do what they see fit and please themselves. If they want to reward you back for coins, they will do so. It's pretty simple. We can't stop merchants today putting up a shingle and saying, I'm now accepting Zucoins because I have a wallet address. Got nothing to do with us, neither the platform. Business is the same. A peer can be an individual, a corporation offering services, or a merchant. So we stand by the fact that the Zucoins in isolation are consistent with ASIC's own guidelines 225. It's not a financial product based on any concepts that relate to a non-payment cash payment facility. Now, the real one that they hence the calls to you guys, and you make your own call on the reactions that you have with the ASIC guys. But the reality is, it's not a financial product that you guys are pooling any of your monies or anything in contribution whatsoever, expressly or impliedly, to us, that your expectations are anything beyond receiving the coin. We're not giving anybody anything in terms of the private businesses. There's nothing of any pooling or intention to pool any monies in common enterprise with which you can sit back and say, I'm entitled to something extra, or thought I would get something extra because it could be defined as a managed investment scheme. It's just nonsense. People know that I enjoy the racing industry. If I sell a coin and I want to lose it on alligator blood, I will do so, because it's not pooled money and it's not responsible to anybody that has anything to do with the relationship of receiving a coin. You have acquired an asset. Now, you can take that asset, that coin. There are things in play that'll happen in terms of exchanges, which is a separate position. They've got to be regulated, and they do their thing with Austrac if they're onshore businesses here or operating with Australian citizens. You'll certainly have merchants that'll get caught up in the same thing. That's the whole purpose of decentralization. What we're saying is we're delivering the next generation crypto, which we are. Sure, we may have been slow. Things have changed on the journey. But I'm content and comfortable in order to release that product to the extent it'll take on the world with mass market and mass adoption. Now, the point I made with Warren from ASIC was, how do people know that the ASIC people that are ringing aren't scammers? Well, there's got to be some, even though he's got the database, or ASIC rather, and they're ringing around private information, there's no certainty from your side as to what the caller at the other end is ASIC. Hence the email to tell you that, let them know. Now, ASIC doesn't come out up front and say that when they make a call, hello, Johnny, we've got an issue. We're investigating this particular crypto, as they're doing many cryptos and all over, and so they should, by the way. They don't say up front, listen, I'm ringing you on a voluntary basis. You haven't got a Section 19. You're not compelled to do anything. Now, you can wish them all the luck in the world. You can say, g'day, how are you going? How's the kids? I don't want to share anything with you. It's bad enough that the list that ASIC has, and from my experience, I put this on the table, no matter the privacy issues that ASIC goes on about, which I put the links there for you, that material will be shared with other government departments. I have evidence of that from previous cases. So the first shot across the bow would be the tax office. Be aware that the moment you start trading on the exchanges and there's some turnover and what's going on, the tax office will be ready and waiting, because ASIC's now got the details of the coins, which we had no choice but to do under that mandate. Otherwise, we go to jail for not providing the information. I hope that makes sense. Now, within 24 hours, we ourselves got a call from Austrac. Do you need to be or are you in breach of Section 50A of the AML KYC Act, CTF Act? Why? Because they were trying to suggest that maybe we're a digital currency exchange. Now, we refute that. When we're selling our entity private Zucoins, which is online, they're going as sales to buyers. It's not an exchange. You can't trade on our Zucoins.com as an exchange. There is no exchange. There's sales that you want to buy, we want to sell. That's it. And that's the way in which that operates. We're not offering anything beyond that. We talk about what we see as the comparisons with Bitcoin. I mean, I've told him a million times before, I don't know the basis upon which Bitcoin would trade at $23,000 US a coin. I have no clue. No one knows, but it does. And the only shift in that dynamic is supply and demand, or people talking about a hedge against the complete global stuff-ups by governments and what they're doing with money printing, the disasters economically that happened that I've talked about, the share markets are in turmoil, the list goes on. So there is a value proposition to retain that for the future. That's a complete choice of what people do with crypto. Now, it's not illegal to own crypto. Governments have mandated that you can own crypto. The point is to make sure that those that are involved in the crypto space comply with the laws, of which we say clearly our advices are the technology we have, the structure of our businesses is that Zucoins and the PWA wallet are not a financial product. Therefore, we're not conducting financial services business and we're not conducting any exchanges. Now, time will tell as a result of how that works. But the way ASIC wants to work this program, and I'm being upfront, is that they want you to talk about terms of investment, that you've invested something with us and there's some expectation that you've got more than what is beyond the coin. That's not the case. The terminology is that you have an asset that you've acquired and that you are a buyer of that asset. And the market forces will take care of itself in terms of that, just like Bitcoin or Ethereum or Litecoin. I mean, there was a plunge in the world crypto for good reason. People were selling. And if there's a weight of sellers, of course, the buyers aren't there. What happens? The price goes down. Now, some of the calls I've had, people said, well, Alan, can you explain a little bit in an analogy form as what you mean and the distinction between the way in which ASIC has been mandated this responsibility as the corporate regulator in this financial sector? And there's a couple of things that I can share with you. I've done some interesting work in the last month or so. The first one is, the best analogy I can think of is this. If you go to Dan Murphy's tonight and you decide that it's time to celebrate, you've got your coins, you can see what we're doing, you're happy, you're long, you're short, whatever you want to do with those coins, or you're waiting simply that merchants start to come out and roll out in their own back, nothing to do with us, and they accept Zucoins, then, of course, you've got the 10,000 free tax threshold. You know, every transaction, the government says if a merchant accepts crypto directly, there's no tax. So that's you may decide to be a consumer item as the result of your coins, or you want to sit there long term. Entirely a matter for you. But there's a brick wall. There's nothing more than that other than the coin. But let's think about, you go to Dan Murphy's. Now, Dan Murphy's, you walk in there and you grab a bottle, or there's a shelf of Grange Hermitage. And I've used some examples historically, which is very, very intriguing, actually. Let's take a 1971 bottle. Magnificent. Not that I can have it because I get gout. But no doubt there's the other guys out there that will be enjoying a nice red and say this is magnificent, either to consume or keep or store. Now, the average movement of that price in the market for a 71 bottle is $700 minimum, or $1,100. What's interesting is when it first came out, that's the Penfolds Bin 95, the retail price when they hit the shelves was $10. Now think about that. So that's a 71 bottle, $10. Let's go back in time. The Penfolds bin 46 ranges from 14,000 to 18,000, but it was a hidden, it was a secret hidden grange that they held back on, supply and demand, but they were out there out and about for $13. So if you went into Dan Murphy's and you thought about this grange and you picked it up for $13, that's the asset that you've bought. You can either consume the damn thing or you can sit it on the shelf and never see it again. So you're waiting since 1958. If I go back further, I'm getting to the point. 1952. What a great year that was. Penfolds bin 1. Now, you'd be lucky to find it at Dan Murphy's, but I'm sure they could get it in if they made the right appropriate calls, or you're going to find it. But let's say that's the case. They had a high range of $16,600. But guess what? The retail price at the time was $1. So those that were astute enough that understood Grange, they go into Dan Murphy's, they look for that 1952 bottle, they pay $1, they buy a dozen, and they decide not to drink them. Now, when you get to the counter of Dan Murphy's and the bottles are lined up and the bill comes up for that, in that instance, $12, is there anybody on the planet that stands there at the checkout and argues with the person that's processing the bill and says, I don't want to pay that price? Now think about it. You go into Dan Murphy's. When was the last time you haggled for a slab of beers, some gin and tonics, or any other product they've got that said, I don't want to pay that price, I'll offer you this? Doesn't happen. The price of that particular commodity is set. Dan Murphy's have set the price. Now, as luck would have it, if you walk out the door and you sat on it for all these years and it's worth $16,000, who's the beneficiary of that value? The person that's holding the Grange. But guess what? At no stage in that entire transaction does the person that buys the Grange think for 1 second they're entitled to some form of pooling of the money that they've just paid the $12, that they're going to get some extra value out of Dan Murphy's. Dan Murphy's has got the product, you've received the product, that's it. That's the concepts in terms of financial product, in terms of managed investment scheme. You bought the Grange, you take it out the door. Now, for a whole raft of reasons, there could be a storm that comes through and wipes out the entire vineyards in relation to Grange Hermitage. Guess what? Supply and demand, price will go up. It's got nothing to do with what when you spent your $12 when you first went in there. Now, you can go back even more recently than that, and they talk about, current prices of Grange or any of the products, the Shirazes and things. That's the commodity that you've bought. Now, you might go sit in the car and all of a sudden there's a news announcement, a bulletin, that everybody in China is not allowed to drink red wine. Well, what do you think is going to happen? That's the external forces that relate to that value of the bottle. That's what we're talking about, whether it's a bottle of Grange, whether it's a coin. In those instances, that's where it stops and starts. Now, that's the sort of thing that when you're talking or you're saying with ASIC, and you don't have to answer the questions, by the way, there's nothing to compel you to do so. As I said, they're looking to get witnesses in relation to this. Of course, that takes you into another stratosphere. As soon as you put your hand up with that sort of stuff, well, of course, you end up in court and your whole life changes in one big direction. That's what I've been doing for the last 30 years. It's extraordinary. In a silly sense of way, I quite enjoy it. So that's the analogy. Now, when we talk about the role and what ASIC's doing to enforce this stuff, and that's the test of the time, we stand by everything we've done in the decentralized program, what we're doing, the amazing, fantastic transfers and no losses between parties, what with the efficiencies we're doing with the ZuBot, freely giving the node code to everybody, et cetera, as we propagate. That's going to be fantastic because it's a global opportunity of the take-up that I've talked about to make it simple, to reduce the friction and get tens and tens of millions of wallets and transfers. Now, we've done some pretty big transfers in the last week, and I can tell you something about that. A, there was no fees. B, there was 100% certainty on the two-factor authentication between the sender and receiver. Perfect. Significant sums of money, and there's no blocking. There's no phone call from the bank saying, we're not going to let this happen. Now, we've had a lot of inquiries, and ourselves as well, that banks are blocking and have been blocking what they see or their perception is what may or may not be a scam, particularly in the crypto space. Now, on the face of it, that's fantastic. The banks are doing you and I a favor. They got all this technology. They want to help us spend our money better or use our money. Now, the reality is the banks are a glorified company. Yeah, they have this brand, I'm a bank. The reality is they're an incorporated body. They have employees, they have managers, they have boards, and they have people responsible within the bank. But suddenly, they've become an outsourced government regulatory body. The banks sit there and they decide what may or may not, in their view, professional otherwise, be a scam. Well, that's what we suspect. Well, more than that, we know that the inquiry from ASIC came about because from the information we have and the records we've obtained through our complaints to the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, CommBank decided in its wisdom that they were blocking people from trying to purchase their Zucoins because they didn't A, either like the product, or B, suspected that it was a scam and they would report it. Now, since when does the bank become an outsourced arm of government without any court controls that they make a decision to freeze money that we and others have lent them through a deposit? I mean, a deposit's a loan. It's not their money. The banks have the pleasure of taking our money deposits, creating these U-boot financial products, still regulated by the regulatory bodies, and they can't do their job. So it's to short circuit the whole thing. They don't want to just report a suspicious transaction, which in the normal channel would go to the regulator, AUSTRAC or ASIC, and then there'd be court orders because there's an umpire. There's supposed to be an umpire in this great constitution. That is a third party to say yes or no, it may or may not be, and therefore will we or won't we freeze those assets, or will we continue to trace those assets? Now, the banks have circumvented through their so-called discretionary contracts between the consumer and the bank to say to you, we're freezing that account. And this has happened to a number of our clients. It's been subsequently, some of them unfrozen, but nevertheless, it caused grief. One of our track work riders who lives hand to mouth each week had $909.84 frozen because of the bank's suspicions at the CommBank that they suspected a scam in relation to the Zucoin product, which is just garbage. Now, they don't tell anybody. They hide behind the shield of we can't discuss it. There's privacy issues. We forced the issue. We got evidence in terms of the email trail, and it's just nonsense. So the next thing they do is they refer it to ASIC to try and cover their tracks, to get the powerhouse corporate cops to come in and make sure they're doing their due diligence on the. I don't have a problem with that. Never had a problem with the CommBank discussions. What I have a problem with, that the scenario of the banks, that they are, as I said, they are a corporation. They obtain their licenses pursuant to the heads of power under the Constitution. They don't make this thing up. The Parliament of Australia says we're going to create this thing called the Banking Act, and we will issue licenses to reputable peoples and organisations to manage people's monies. I mean, they are a glorified instructional body to take instructions of what to do with your processing and transactions. And in the meantime, they issue other products, which they're regulated by ASIC themselves, in order to get those products out and look after you guys, the consumers. Well, that went out the window, didn't it? Now, I don't know whether anybody has bothered to take the time to read the entirety of the Royal Commission report handed down by Commissioner Kenneth Hayne on the 1st of February 2019. It's a wonderful report. Great nighttime reading. Now, one of the things that I've done is an analysis is, how is it that there's this debanking going on? There's this so-called contract between consumer and bank that gives them the unilateral discretion to call the shots on your money, our money, And this is why they don't like decentralised programs. I've alluded to this before, because it puts the control back and the responsibility in the hands of every individual person. I mean, I don't need help from the bank if I want to have a bet. I'm not stupid. Certainly there are people that need protection, of course, and they can ask for that as well. But we don't need a sub-arm of government creating these little agencies that circumvent the court processes and procedures, that somehow a bank can freeze money, which is a Barnes and Addy constructive trust issue if there is a fraud, and then trace it to other third-party accounts and freeze those as well without a single court order. It's absolutely insane. So I decided to do a review through the Royal Commission of exactly what ASIC's been up to with the banks as a result of the Royal Commission. Because the assumption is that the banks are the good guys, and the good guys know what they're doing. And they can identify this stuff. They're very clever on identifying scams. This is their new role in life. Now, they have reporting obligations to AUSTRAC, and they have reporting obligations to maintain their licensings and et cetera as financial institutions with ASIC. But that's their responsibility. They're not the new sheriffs in town to do the dirty work that causes people grief with their very own assets. Now, let's have a little squiz at some of the banks in the recent months. Now, this one I like. And we're putting this up on the website, by the way, so you can all have it at your leisure, have a good look at some of the things that we're dealing with, some of the banks. But CommBank, we'll focus on CommBank because they are the ones that are big noting themselves that they are in the interest of the consumers when they're all concerned about their balance sheet and their profit and the money they're making from consumers, which is you and I. I've been with the CommBank for 40 odd years. Never had a problem. I haven't changed my personality in 40 years. Everybody on the planet knows that I'm running around in a bankruptcy case chasing the monies from the government for their own stuff-ups going back 25 years. There's no secret. And suddenly, all of a sudden, there's an interest because we're creating something that's well beyond the concepts of how it will work through decentralisation of this finance that's being achieved. But nevertheless, let's look at the first one. 4th of June 2018. An agreement was reached between AUSTRAC and the CBA to put to the Federal Court of Australia that CBA would pay a $700 million penalty for breaches in relation to the Anti-Money Laundering Act for its failures to comply to AUSTRAC. Now, that's its responsibility to AUSTRAC. So it's not you as the depositor, it's not me. We've got nothing to do with that. $700 million penalty. Now, that's an agreed penalty. So normal people go to court, they get charged with something, and they're at the mercy of the court to decide the penalty. But somehow government is able to achieve a balance. Well, we'll work out a fee. Now, if you look at the extent of the fees, it says they failed to comply monitoring transactions on 778,330 accounts. Now, that's not insignificant. You think about the transaction volumes on the back of that. 53,506 threshold transaction reports in relation to cash transactions that went through ATM machines more than $10,000. Now, that's just AUSTRAC. Westpac, on the other hand, let's talk about Westpac. They cop a $1.3 billion penalty. Now, by an agreed terms with AUSTRAC for 70 million transactions. The bank would be broke. If the court sat there and said, listen, there's 70 million transactions that you've stuffed up, you've in breach, how are you going to resolve that unless the government sits at the table and says, let's do a deal? Let's do a deal that's sensible, that's not too much. It's enough that the shareholders of the bank can afford to pay because they're only ripping off the shareholders, transferring money from the bank shareholders, investors, to the government black hole to feed Treasury, and everybody seems to be happy. But they're starting to get themselves caught out because as you now go to the Royal Commission, the penalties have been coming thick and fast. But thick and fast, where there's some interesting stuff, I'll just get to that now, where the banks are starting to plead criminal guilt. Now, on the 29th of October 2021, CBA pleaded guilty to 30 criminal charges of making false or misleading representations to 165 customers selling consumer products. Between 2011 and 2015, they made false, misleading representations that people could claim against their insurance policies when these policies weren't even available. Now, the conduct was the subject of the Royal Commission. What's interesting, CBA had to remediate $250 million to impacted customers. The court is still deciding the criminal penalties, and they're deciding them on the basis of agreed sets of facts between ASIC and the CBA. What staggers me with this is that CBA's throwing rocks in glass houses and seems to be the high-level institution that can throw stones at us about our product, but it's pleading guilty to criminal charges. Now, they're criminal charges of a body corporate. Let's try and understand what this means. ASIC says we've succeeded in forcing the bank to admit to these criminal charges as a body corporate. And we've got penalties out of them. We've received some money. We've recashed up the government coffers with these things. But we're still going to let CBA, who can't even get its own act together, to go picking on other people and make allegations that are falsely accusing people of crimes. Now, what's staggering, the courts are accepting the so-called corporate penalty, criminal penalty, but you don't put a corporate company in jail. So where are all the people that caused that corporate criminal offence? These corporate offences go right through a number of banks. I've identified 18 corporate transactions plus criminal penalties. Penalties is staggering. I mean, Westpac's a classic. They got a $20 million penalty, because they were charging deregistered companies who they could easily find out in a heartbeat that they're deregistered, 28,000 deregistered companies with 120 million bucks locked up. Now, what's intriguing is ASIC and everybody gets excited. The bank pays $20 million penalties. It goes straight to the government coffers. But we can't find a single person in the banks, not a staff member, not a manager, not a CFO, not a board director. There's not one single person that's identified as having the mind and will of the company to allow these things to happen. Now, what's the importance of a deregistered company? Well, under the ASIC's own guidelines and reports, once you've got a deregistered company, all the assets vest with ASIC. Now, I find this quite ironic. So you could have 120 million bucks, which they've said, that Westpac's sitting on. Those assets belong to ASIC and the government until there's claims that are made against those. Now, if the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions had any nous about them, that's a fraud committed by Westpac on a conspiracy to defraud the Commonwealth of its money, subject to third parties taking access against those assets. That's just staggering. So Westpac drains all these accounts of the 120 million, openly admits it, but we can't find anybody that's done it in the bank. We can't find anybody in CBA that's done it with the criminal charges. We don't know anybody that's caused the money laundering issues at any level, any individuals, for 1.3 billion of shareholder funds vaporising, 700 million in the case of Combank. We can't find a single person. It's pretty mysterious, really. But someone has to be in the power in relation to those transactions within the bank. Now, why do I know that? Because it's pretty simple. The commissioner in the Royal, the commissioner of the Royal Commission into the financial service and misconduct by the banks, of which these matters are being fed to ASIC, makes it pretty clear. I'll just read you this on page 154 of the Commission report. Thus, subject to some exceptions that are not relevant, conduct engaged in on behalf of a body corporate by a director, employee or agent within the scope of the person's actual or apparent authority is taken for the purposes of a proceeding for an offence based on section 1041G to have been engaged in also by the body corporate. If it is necessary to establish the state of mind of the body corporate, it is sufficient to show that a director, employee, or agent of the body, being a director, employee, or agent by whom which the conduct was engaged in within the scope of that person's actual or apparent authority, had the state of mind. So the corporations, the banks, glorified companies, are pleading guilty to criminal matters, but there's nobody there that's in the position that's saying that I'm the mind and will of that entity that's caused that offence to have occurred. Where are the charges? Now, 1041G, it's a dishonest charge that relates to conducting things in this instance, as highlighted, for banks, in one example, charging fees for no service. They're just sucking the money out. But what's extraordinary, everybody seems comfortable that ASIC or government, AUSTRAC, can negotiate a nice, settlement behind the scenes that the payment of penalty by the corporation seems to be sufficient. And yet here we are, we've got the CommBank out and about, multitudes of offences admitted, both misleading and misleading representations. The list goes on. False accounts, falsifying this and that. They can't tell, there's no person to identify with that. And they're throwing stones at us. I mean, you got to wonder sometimes just how much of the Truman Show we're involved in. Sometimes it can't be real. Now, if you think of that and you think of what's happening, government has engaged the services of these corporation banks to do their dirty work in terms of how it goes with the consumers, your funds. You are lending money to the CommBank or the Westpac or whichever bank it is. And these people who don't have a skerrick by admission, their own criminal issues, are running around making decisions that the courts need to be made, or others that are put to the courts through the appropriate corporations law, etc. And they're not. The best example is it's like the banks are all a bunch of, foxes. It's like putting 5 or 6 foxes in the coop with all the chickens. See how that goes. They should be independent, acting in the interest of the consumers. And if there is issues to be flagged, they refer it to the regulator, and the regulators take action as to whether or not that funds can or cannot be frozen, or whether or not allegations can or cannot be made in relation to the type of products that are out there. Not the job of the banks, I can assure you. And it just makes my resolve far greater than ever that what we are sitting on with Zucoins and the decentralisation of what we've created is more powerful than ever, because there's got to be some parallel universe that puts a block on people that are non-existent, not prepared to take responsibility. There's not a single person has been identified by ASIC in any bank, in any case in this country. Sure, there's some officers that have had frauds in their own right, but not frauds or misrepresentations acting on behalf of the bank that the bank gets away with paying a penalty. And as I said, that penalty is draining consumers again, taxpayers again, investors, super funds, pensioners. You would find it staggering that shareholders would be delighted from officers that have no accountability within the banks write out a $1.3 billion check of shareholders' equity. So, ASIC, yes, go for it. This is what we're on about. The people that we have who have bought coins, think about the Grange Hermitage analogy. Think about the way in which they will they can contort and twist the lines of questioning to get marry in with the jigsaw puzzle that they want. We've provided advices about how we stand. We know where we stand with things, and this only makes it far greater and far more important than ever that I'm front and center. Zucoins is an extraordinary crypto asset. The technology is extraordinary, and it puts us in box seat that we're well and truly next generation crypto as to where we go with this. So don't fear the ASIC call. Embrace it if you have to. Talk about it with them if you wish. It's voluntary. Go for it. We're doing everything here to make sure that they've got the information they want. And if they happen to come back by the wrong conclusions for their own, there's a lot of overzealous people in some of these organisations, and there's a lot of genuine guys and girls in relation to the way they look at the law. I love the law, but I won't be taking anything sitting down, I can tell you. There's too much at stake with globalisation of this and the work that we put in. And I guess at the end of the day, look, it must be hard to believe when you think about, as I've said in the past, Facebook with 10,000 employees trying to create something that they failed, and even with $1 billion or more, and they're failing bigger with the metaverse, that one single guy from Albury-Wodonga can revolutionise and change the whole concepts and thinking and reverse the current thinking that we see with the blockchains. And it may be hard to believe. Of course it is. It was hard to believe the doubters. My great horse, Alligator Blood, was going to win another Group 1. We tick the boxes. We get it done. I have a mandate and stronger than ever. So look out, everybody. Coming back. Roadmaps are there. Make sure, if you're comfortable, back up, restore. There's an email going out. Register your wallet address. Let's get this going. We've got stragglers coming through. Now's the time. You'll find it'll be okay. It'll be okay if you can back up, and you'll find you'll have on USBs, you'll have it on your computer, you'll put it elsewhere on hard drives, external drives. The list goes on. And it's amazing what you're going to see happening over this journey. My focus, Robert's focus, we lost a week because of this stuff. Back on track, pushing nodes, decentralization of the nodes. We're pushing the Zubot, giving it free to everybody so they can suddenly use the thing, whether they long-term their merchants or whether it's the exchanges we're working through. That's our program. We've delivered everything else. System works perfect. Well, that's my rant for the day. Just want to make sure you understand the circumstances that have evolved here in relation to the CommBank, in relation to accusations there. I'm here, our office, 411 Kiwa Street. Visit any time. That's what I do. I'm also around. You can see me on the media. Not going anywhere. This product is exactly what we've talked about. Supply and demand. Grange hermitage. Keep that in the back of your mind. Have a great night, everybody. Any questions, come back to me. Excited, more excited than ever. The adrenaline's running. Let's make this work. And thank you, everybody, for your support. Been sensational. And let's get on with it. Look forward to 17th September at that crypto conference. That's where we'll be. Cheers, everybody.